we'll just give people a few minutes to join. As you may have just heard, because it always throws me off, the voice has told us that the meeting is being recorded. So the recording of this session will go on our website and our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you don't want to be on camera and those sorts of things, don't, and that's fine. But just to make you aware that it's being recorded. As I say, we'll give people a few more minutes to join, but welcome. We're joined today by Paul Simons, who's the Chair of Trustees at Cleveland Pools Trust and is going to talk to us about the restoration of Cleveland Pools Lido. I'll do, as I say, a proper introduction in a few minutes, but I hope you all had good days so far. Okay, I think hopefully people will start to join in the next few moments, but I'll maybe, do we think, shall we get started, Kate and Paul, or should we give people a few more minutes?
I think a few more minutes. There's quite a few joining. We're up to 14 at the moment, so there should be more coming along.
Europa Nostra.
Just a reminder to people who've joined to, if they're not on mute, sorry, I may have just spoken over Catherine, so apologies if I have spoken over you trying to raise something there, but if you're not intending to speak, just don't forget to put yourself on mute.
I think let's go ahead, shall we?
Cool. Okay, well, welcome everyone to, as I say, we are, this is one of our seminars on Europa Nostra Awards presentation. So we're joined by Paul Simons today, who's the chair of the Cleveland Pools Trustees and is here to talk to us about Cleveland Pools Lido. But first, a bit of an introduction to Europa Nostra UK and our work. So as Europeans, people who've lived here for generations, as well as people who have newly arrived, we take full responsibility for transmitting this heritage in good shape to future generations. Europa Nostra is the leading citizens' movement to protect and celebrate Europe's cultural and natural heritage. We're the voice of all who believe that cultural heritage is vital for our economy, our society, our culture, our environment, our well-being, and for the future of Europe. Europa Nostra UK is a UK-based charity that supports Europa Nostra. Our aims are to nurture enthusiasm for our shared European cultural heritage, to articulate the values and ideas that connect us to our colleagues in Europe, to raise the profile of EN UK in order to support Europa Nostra's Europe-wide representation, to foster links and cooperation with other European heritage bodies in civil society and beyond, and to sustain UK participation in shaping European heritage policy and vice versa. As a stay tonight, we are delighted to bring you the 6th webinar in our new series of Europa Nostra UK webinars, showcasing recent European Heritage Award winners from the UK, as well as projects from elsewhere that might inspire organisations in the UK. The European Heritage Awards / Europa Nostra Awards were launched in 2002 by the European Commission and have been run by Europa Nostra ever since. The awards identify and promote best practices in the conservation and enhancement of tangible and intangible cultural heritage, stimulate the trans-frontier exchange of knowledge throughout Europe, increase public awareness and appreciation of Europe's cultural heritage, and encourage further excellent initiatives through the power of example. So before I hand over to Paul, just a couple of housekeeping rules. So obviously, as I mentioned at the start, this session is being recorded. So if you don't want your and will be published on our website and on our YouTube videos. So if you don't want your image to be captured, do keep your camera off. Also, if people could just check that they are on mute, so that it's sort of quiet for when we are being presented. That would be great. And if our admin does mute you, apologies. But just yeah, if people could check that. I think there might be someone. It might be Susan Smith. Sorry. If you wouldn't mind just popping yourself on mute, that would be great. But yeah, so I'll hand over to Paul in a minute. So he'll do his presentation, and we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. If you want to use the chat and ask questions as Paul is going, then do that, and we can collect all of the questions at the end and put them to Paul. But as always, keep the chat friendly. So now I'd like to introduce the topic of tonight's webinar. So our sixth webinar is presented by Paul Simons, and we'll celebrate a 2023 winning entry, the Cleveland Pools Lido in Bath, which forms a component of two World Heritage inscriptions, the City of Bath World Heritage Site and the most recent Great Spa Towns of Europe World Heritage Site. The pools are the oldest open-air public swimming pool in the UK, probably in Western Europe, and are Grade 2 star listed. They were closed and disused since the 1980s, but have been subject to a remarkable restoration journey, which has not been without its challenges. So I'd like to introduce Paul, who is the Chair of Trustees. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Ollie. I'll just get the presentation up. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Kate, as well, from Europa Nostra. I just kind of get that up on the full screen. Is that on full screen?
It is indeed, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I'm really pleased to be with you, and I am very reminiscent of last September when I, with two of the trustees, Mary Stacey and Ina Harris, the deputy chair, went to Venice to collect a beautiful brass plaque, which is now of the Europa Nostra logo, which is now on the building you can see here on the left. We call it the Cottage, the main entrance to the Cleveland Pools, and it's shown there with pride because not only have we won 3 national awards in the UK, we actually won a European award as well as one of the 9 most inspiring conservation and restoration projects of 2023, and it was a great joy to be in Venice to receive that. So that was a great acknowledgement of what this remarkable project has achieved. This is a photograph of Cleveland Pools. First thing to notice is there's only men there. I'll come on to that a little later. But this was the pools that apply as the legal expert in the organisation. I think is Valerie Eden talking to a lawyer? Right. I think she isn't any longer. Right. The Cleveland Pools are the oldest open-air public swimming pool by a long way in the United Kingdom. And we believe, because I was involved very much for 10 years with the Great Spa Towns of Europe, the oldest open-air swimming pool in Western Europe of its type, a public swimming pool. There are other private ones. And this photograph at the turn of the 20th century shows the cottage, as we affectionately call it, in the center of this curve, this crescent structure, which has 6 changing rooms on either side. It's got lots of resonances with Bath, because Bath, as Ollie has said, is a double World Heritage Site. The 1,150, I think 59 World Heritage Sites, there's only 22 officially listed as having dual inscriptions. And it's a unique feature of the City of Bath that it was listed nearly 35 years ago as the City of Bath for its hot springs, its Roman archaeology, and its 18th century town planning of the great Palladian architecture of the city. But by 2021, another submission had gone in from 7 European countries with 11 component sites, and each component is a spa town, a whole urban centre, a town or a city, representing the European cultural phenomena, which we call the spa towns. And that was talking more about medicine, health and well-being, the nascent tourism industry of Europe. People went to spa towns before they ever went to the seaside, and all the other traditions of social activity, great composers, and lots of intangible aspects of the heritage that we now talk about in the 2020s. So it was great to see the inscriptions, the two joint inscriptions of Bath now running in parallel, and one telling a completely different story to the original one. And that was a great opportunity to not just talk about Cleveland Pools as a piece of listed 18th century architecture, but also to talk about why it was built, what it was used for, and what purpose its function served. And this is one of those early photographs, and I'll explain more. There's two slides in this presentation that involve nudity. I don't think they'll offend anybody. I hope they won't, but I'll give you due warning when they're coming up. This is an aerial view. Thank goodness we now have drones. They're a damn nuisance, but they're also very useful from time to time. And this is before we started the project. This swimming pool, as you can see, in the center, and to the left is a smaller pool. I think you can see my cursor, although that is a very early swimming pool as well of the 1860s. Is the Cleveland Pool site, and you can see that the cottage with the symmetry of the 6 changing rooms on either side is a crescent, which Bath is very famous for its crescents, and this was the little hidden and lost crescent of the city. And this site was completely forgotten about, completely overgrown, surrounded by trees and later development, with no vehicular or road access to it whatsoever. And it had been completely forgotten about, but you can also see its juxtaposition to the River Avon, which will become a rather major influential element as we go through the presentation. Oh, here's the first slide with a little bit of nudity. They're all young boys. And the reason Cleveland Pools was created was that in 1805, the River Avon Act in the city of Bath forbade naked bathing. They were referring to men and boys who used to swim in the river naked. And at the time, the riverside walks had been open for promenading with people in their finery who were visiting Bath. And it was reported that they were offended by this naked bathing and it had to stop. And so a local bylaw was passed to forbid it. And the men of the town, and these weren't visitors, these were the artisans, the professional classes, craftspeople who made their living out of visitors, but were here living permanently in the city, demanded that they wanted to have open air bathing. And so they clubbed together a private subscription scheme of the men of the town, and they raised enough money to build the Cleveland Pools. Here you can see a map, which is really a map of Georgian Bath prior to the Victorian extension. If I just run my cursor around this rather curious oval shape here at the bottom, that is the path still reflected in Bath's town plan of the Roman walls. And the Roman walls became the medieval walls. The medieval city of Bath never expanded burst through those walls. But the 18th century city did, first of all into Queen's Square, then up to the Circus, and then along Brock Street to the famous Royal Crescent. And then as the Georgian city expanded up the hillsides with more squares, more crescents appeared on the hillside, enjoying the great views. And then the Georgian city burst across the river, the Great Pulteney Bridge, into Great Pulteney Street, extended into Sydney Gardens. And right at the top here, we have the site of Cleveland Pools on the river, isolated from the Georgian city at the time. This map is a composite map. It's the Georgian city mainly, but you can see it also has superimposed on it in the orange line, Mr. Brunel's Great Railway Line. This is an early map. The pools were built between 1815 and 1817. it's believed it was a bend in the river, but we actually believe it was a marl pit, because at the time these were all market gardens supplying Bath with vegetable and fruit and produce. And you can see there's a marl pit by the side of the river. And we suspect that Cleveland Pools was the site of another marl pit, which then it was taken over by the subscribers to the Cleveland Pools. They got a lease on this site, and they eventually seem to have dug out the pit, or it was a bend in the river. We're not quite sure. And later they put sluice gates on it. They had a nice island there. Here's the crescent of the buildings, the cottage in the middle there. Once a month, we believe these sluice gates were open. They flushed all the water out, filled it again with river water, and continued swimming. I mentioned it was for men only initially, and that is the case. But it didn't take the ladies very long to insist that they had a facility as well. And a ladies' pool was built. But in those days, men swam, ladies bathed. Ladies did not swim. And the ladies' pool is a small pool just here. It still survives, and it was open air, but it had a 10-foot solid wall all the way around it, so the men couldn't observe the ladies bathing. And this was fed by a separate cold water spring from the hills behind us. So this wasn't river water like the main men's pool. This was fresh spring water, which I have to say is very, very cold. And at the time, it wasn't heated. I've got my face and everybody else's face in the way of this wording. I'm just trying to get rid of that. Let me just get my view. Oh, it's not coming up. Never mind. This tells you that this is a rather grainy picture, but you'll forgive that because it was taken from a hot air balloon, and you can clearly see the pools here as they were in the 1980s. This is the River Avon. This is the Kennerton Avon Canal at the bottom of the picture, and this is Mr. Brunel's Great Railway line between Bristol and Paddington. And at the top of the picture, this is the London Road, the A4 connecting Bath to London. And these are meadowlands, and that unfortunate big thing in the top there is Morrison's, but we'll forget that. Bath became a unitary authority in the late 1990s. And it took it some time to Bath and North East Somerset Council, as it became, to realise it actually owned this closed down and derelict swimming pool that hadn't been used since 1984. And the clever chaps in the council's property department thought, well, let's sell it off and make some money and put it on the market. And at that point, back in 2004, the local community, frankly, were outraged. And many of the then middle-aged and 50-somethings and 60-somethings in Bath all remembered when they were youngsters spending their summers at Cleveland Pools and learning to swim there. Some very early swimming lessons, possibly some of the first in the UK, took place at the Cleveland Pools way back in the 1820s and 1830s. And many, many people who still talk to us in the city recall learning to swim at Cleveland Pools. So outrage occurred, and the council were told in no uncertain terms that this belongs to the community and they'd like it back. That started a 20-year drive, a 20-year story of highs and lows, as the local community initially prevented the council from selling the property on the open market, demanded it came back into community use. The council agreeing to let a community action group take on the project. In other words, the council weren't prepared to do it or spend any money on it at that time. And that community initiative eventually became a new charity, which was registered back in 2004. So the Cleveland Pools Trust is now 20 years old this year. And eventually, as the only major funder of a project as complex and as expensive as this was the lottery, thank goodness the National Lottery Heritage Fund, as now is, was created. And our first lottery application for funds to renovate these pools was submitted in 2012. and we finally got reopened in 2023. These projects are enormously complicated, take a huge amount of time and effort. They have successes and failures, ups and downs, and you need pretty thick skin, I have to say, to pull one of these projects off over such a long, drawn-out period. This is a longer description of the timeline. I won't go through it in detail. So you can see that the site was put up for sale, and £400,000 for a small derelict cottage and 2 derelict swimming pools in 2024 was an awful lot of money to ask for, particularly as it has no vehicular access to the site. But the trust was was established. Friends tried to take on the project. We got it up, it was upgraded from grade 2 to grade 2 star and was put on the National Heritage at Risk list by Historic England. And back in 2012, I mentioned the first application went into the lottery. That resulted in a stage 1 development grant, which was finally submitted for stage 2 in 2017, but that was rejected. And at that time, the project was 4.6 million. Another stage 2 application was then resubmitted the following year. The price had gone up to 4.8 million, and that was successful, and the project went out to tender in 2019. I don't need to tell you all what happened in 2020. We were literally within weeks of signing a contract, and something nasty started to happen and people started getting ill. It was called COVID, and the rest is history. If we'd have signed that contract, we'd have probably been bankrupt and out of business within 3 months, because a contractor would have been asking for his overheads and his preliminary costs whilst not being able to build the project, because he wouldn't have been able to have a workforce. But we would have been contractually obliged to pay out. Thank goodness we didn't sign that contract. And by 2021, the lottery was saying we had emergency funding to keep going through COVID. We didn't furlough our 3 staff. Only 1 was full-time, 2 were part-time. And through the Kickstart Fund with DCMS, with additional COVID emergency funding from the lottery, and an upgrading of our grants from Historic England, again because of the COVID crisis, we re-tendered the project on the basis that we had to sign a contract by April 2021. We did that, but look, the price had gone up from 4.8 to 6.4 million as a direct result of COVID, and that was 6.4 out of a total project cost of 8.3 million. Costs were out of control, and the lottery said, this is the last chance we have to uplift your grant to 6.4 million of public funding. You must sign the contract and get on with it. And we did just that. And we finally got open for swimming in the summer and autumn of last year, 2023. We had achieved planning permission in 2016. Here's one of the drawings for planning, showing the pool cut off into 2 pools, a lower square children's pool, shallow water for youngsters, and a pool that's at the right-hand side. Of the main pool is 0.8 of a meter deep, going at the left-hand end to 1.8 meters deep. And you can see the cottage, the changing rooms, and where the upper swimming pool had been, we've got a terrace, a kiosk, a cafeteria, garage, and plant rooms and what have you. And the ladies' pool area is now an education room and a special room for heritage visits, because as well as a place to visit to swim in, it is a heritage site, and it's also run as a heritage visitor attraction as well now. I like these aerial views. That shows you the location of the pools before the project started. In the 1950s, there were no trees. All these trees are self-seeded sycamore and ash and horse chestnut, and frankly are a darn nuisance. We had to clear some of them away, but as we all know these days, everybody loves trees, and the trees were more important than the heritage at the time, and we've had to live with all these trees that will dump about 5 tons of leaves, conkers, and various other debris in the pools every year. But we've had to design the pools to cope with that. But you can see there's no vehicular access to the site. So I'd like to just spend a little bit of time mentioning logistics. You can't get a lorry or even a car onto that site. So what do you do about delivering lots and lots of building materials and taking away lots of rubbish? As part of our planning application, we had to say how the construction plan was going to work. The pools is in a dead end at the end of a large residential estate of 3,500 people called the Bathwick Estate. Many of those people wanted the pools to be restored. A small group, and it was a small group, didn't want it to happen, and they tended to be the nearest neighbours. And we did have a vociferous small group of opposition against this project. And we certainly weren't going to be allowed to bring any lorry delivering building materials into the Bathwick Estate, apart from concrete, because you can't bring wet concrete along the river, because by the time you got to the site, it would be beginning to set. So we were allowed to bring wet concrete to the site by the road, but nothing else. We therefore had to use the river. It was part of a green travel plan. It was a condition of planning permission, and therefore we had 2 site compounds, a small one on site and one remotely here at Avon Rugby Club, where the photograph is. You can see we're just about to lift a boat into the water, and that was 2 kilometres away. And so for the duration of the project, we had 2 cranes, one at each compound. We had a boat, the boat's there, that pushed the floating pontoon up and down, and materials were therefore handed not twice, as is the normal use on a building site. We had to handle materials 5 times, which involves a lot of people, craneage, expensive plant and equipment, and a lot of time, and time is money. So that total package of logistical management put an extra £1.3 million on the project cost over a 15-month period. And here you can see at the site that little boat with the floating pontoon in front of it arriving at Cleveland Pools. The picture on the right-hand side shows the crane at Cleveland Pools, which was delivered by the boat and had to go on caterpillar tracks up the bank to the site. And thank goodness it never fell in the river. That would have been embarrassing and very expensive. So here you have an aerial view of the site during the early days of construction. In the bottom middle site, you can see a red little spider. That's the crane that's come off the boat, crawled up the bank, and then it folds out like a transformer toy that kids play with, and was how all the materials were lifted off the pontoon onto the site, and how 100% of all the waste from the site, and there was a lot, was lifted in half-ton sacks onto the pontoon and taken back up the river to the site at Avon Rugby Club, where lorries could then take all the waste material to a recycling plant. It was a very complex site. Most building contractors had never worked on a site like this. It was heavily covered in the construction and the national building press as a unique project, just purely from the logistical question. Now, if technology works, I'm going to show you 2 pictures of videos showing in a time-lapse camera the building of the project. So this is the first picture, removing 1 or 2 trees that we had to plead permission to get rid of these sycamore trees, so the pontoon and the boat could tie up alongside the riverbank in the site. And this hopefully will work. It worked earlier, showing you, oh, there it goes. Isn't that splendid? This is a time lapse showing, you can see the cranes moving all the time. It's working all the time, lifting material off the boat and putting all the waste on the boat. And in the winter, we covered the pool as we were casting concrete and laying screeds before the tiling started. So that's an exciting little picture, just showing that was about 8 months worth of work. And oh, it started again. It keeps doing that. Oh, and here is the second one. And this shows you from the end of the last video clip, showing how we then took this project to more towards the completion period. And here we go, all very exciting stuff. Even these little diggers and these dumper trucks were all brought on the river and were lifted onto the site and taken away. And this isn't the finished project, but you can see we've now got water in the pools. We've got stone and rubberized surfaces around the edge of the pool, and we're beginning to get towards completion. but I've limited time today. Oh, it's done it again. Here we go. Yeah, it's I got limited time to really describe everything you could see there, but it's quite good fun. These are photographs of the 1950s, and I just want to say a little bit about tradition, oral tradition, and the massive volunteering project we had whilst we were carrying on with the really technical construction side of things. These are 1950s pictures. Do you notice none of the children are obese? It's really quite interesting to look at these pictures. Although the young chap in top left is smoking, as many of them did in those days. And what a busy, a lovely sight the Cleveland Pools was throughout the whole summer. The council had stopped heating these pools. They did put boilers in the 1920s to heat the pool water in the summer, but it was just so expensive that it was cold most of the time. And it was on a sunny day, there were far more people sunbathing on the banks than there ever were in the water. Everybody tells us just how chilly the water was. You can also see in the bottom left, right across to the London Road and all the great Georgian terraces, when you can't even see them at the moment because of all these all the trees that have encroached the riverbank since. I'm not anti-tree, but I do find them a darn nuisance as they surround our site so much. And every time we want to take a bough away to get a crane to swing, we have to apply for specific permission, and that delayed things considerably during the project. And you can also see this lovely athletic man on the springboard about to take a handstand dive into the water. And we thought we must find these people. We eventually found over 2,000 people who'd swam in the swimming pool who were still alive and had last swam there in the 1980s. This chap, we went on television, we went on radio to try and find him. We found his family, and with great regret, he died just 2 years earlier. But the family gave us permission to use his photograph, and they were delighted when we used him in one of our fundraising posters, as you can see bottom right, to promote the cause of the pools. And just that research and involvement of people and publicity led to a great community drive behind the project, which I have to say we won 2.5 of the major 4 awards we've run have been because of the voluntary effort to this project, and not necessarily because of its heritage qualities and heritage aspects. And this is what it's been like all the way through. School children doing projects and dressing up, families coming for picnics and heritage open days before the work started on site, projects to look at the history of the place, have temporary exhibitions. Bottom right is in the Holborn Museum at Sydney Gardens, nearby to the project, and some parents and fathers and other fans dressing up in historic pool costumes, and one of our Olympic gold medalist patrons here with school children who were doing a big fundraising marathon swim over a weekend to raise money for the project as part of our massive fundraising program. I'll say a little bit more about fundraising shortly, but time doesn't allow to go into all the details. And even volunteers who were artists who could draw for us and help us visualize for publicity material newsletters what it might like when we finished the project. And here you can see the kiosk area, the cafeteria area, bottom right. You can see the square children's pool and the main pool, and lots of people sunbathing and enjoying the bank, as illustrated. And here you can see a few words that describe the massive involvement of volunteers. Obviously, our board of 10 trustees, we are volunteers just like anybody else, but we take on the legal and financial responsibilities of a major project like this. Fundraising, community engagement, schools programs, interpretation, graphics, marketing, presentations. This was all done by volunteers. We have people who are really brilliant graphic designers volunteering, working with historians, going to archive offices, interviewing people and taking oral recordings of the history. And the interpretive boards here, you see, we've got about 7 on site. Were all written and researched by volunteers. They were designed by voluntary graphic designers who had special workshops with people about what we wanted to do with the graphics, what colors should we use, what our logo should be, how we should give a modern image to the future of the pools whilst respecting the heritage. And on the left-hand side, at the bottom of the kiddies pool, it's affectionately called the kiddies pool, the children's pool, there are encaustic tiles set into the base of the pools with drawings from local schools and school children who researched the history and then drew pictures to illustrate it, from the Dolphins Club, the early diving, one of the early keepers of the cottage, the keepers of the pool who kept a pet baboon. There's a picture of the baboon on the bottom of the pools. So youngsters with their goggles on can actually look underwater and see the history of the pools told in the tiles and told by those school children who were involved in this project. And again, we could talk for hours about the involvement of the community and the massive work they did and the great contribution they made to this. So here is just a picture of one of the awards we received. This was the Marsh Award in 2022. We won the regional award and then the national award here at the British Museum. I think there you have 2 members of staff and everybody else is a volunteer, including a vice chancellor of a university. So you can see the caliber of people we were attracting. And this is at the British Museum receiving the Marsh Awards, representing 130 volunteers and nearly 5,000 hours of input. And that year we were shortlisted for the Museums and Heritage Volunteers Award, which we then won as well. So we got the 2 major national awards for volunteering in heritage projects. And then the subsequent year, we won the National Museums and Heritage Awards for conservation. And again, here you can see a celebrity, Vicky McClure, where you can see 2 members of staff, a load of volunteers and 2 happy contractors receiving that award in London as well. And we always tried to send the volunteers to receive the awards whenever they were being received on behalf of the project. I'm running short of time. I haven't time to go through the funding, but many of you will be involved in heritage projects, I'm absolutely sure. And in the UK, we totally rely on the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We raise money in other ways, but they have become the lifeblood of heritage work. And although this was a swimming pool and is now run by a leisure operator on our behalf, that is also a charitable trust, we are a heritage trust and don't know how to run swimming pools. So we were always going to subcontract the finished project to a leisure operator to run on our behalf. But we did originally apply to the Heritage Fund, and that's who provided this magnificent sum of 6.475 million towards a total project cost of 9.25 million. We haven't yet finished. We're still continuing some of our community engagement and schools liaison work. But Bath and North East Somerset Council in 3 tranches contributed. Salix Finance is owned by the government, and they paid under the public sector decarbonisation fund for water source heat pumps that take the heat out of the river and transfer it to energy to heat the swimming pools in the summer. And that's a lecture in itself, which I just haven't time to talk about today. Historic England upped the grant twice to help us with increasing costs. They were magnificent. The Leisure Trust operator made a contribution. We raised 185,000 from private trusts. We raised 120,000 from local people, private fundraising initiatives within Bath and North East Somerset. We did a crowdfunding scheme at the end, which in 6 weeks raised 85,000. WECA is the West of England Combined Authority, who gave us a grant towards the pontoon that floats in the river as a river bus stop. Other funds came in of 70,000, and we got an extra top-up grant of 65,000 from COVID funds. And you can see this project, which we started off thinking it was going to cost around about 4 million, has ended up costing over 9 million. And I sympathise with any trust at the moment trying to raise funds, any heritage trust. It's very competitive. It's harder than ever. Post-COVID, there isn't as much money about for private donating. There isn't as much money in the private grant-making trusts as there used to be, and it's highly competitive. It's incredibly difficult to raise money for projects like this. And I sympathise with all of us who are involved in fundraising for heritage work. And so we finished the project in 2023, and reopened it. And here's just two of many photographs. The one on the left is a historic England photograph showing it in the early evening and showing that crescent. And doesn't it look fantastic? And on the right-hand side, one of our many trial swimming sessions in the early days to test that everything worked and everything was working extremely well. The water source heat pump isn't yet functioning fully because that's been subject to further delays because of us having to comply with new Environment Agency regulations about what we built into the river, but that's now been solved. We now have an abstraction license from the Environment Agency to take the river water, take the heat out of it, and then put the water back in the river. And we were about to start commissioning that work, having had swimming going on all through the winter this year into January, and a very loyal body of between 40 and 60 people every morning turning up between 7:30 and 10 o'clock for a morning swim in unheated water. I think the coldest it got down to was +5 degrees. They say you should only be in the water the number of minutes, the number of degrees, so 5 minutes maximum in the water. And remarkably, 85% of all the cold water swimmers are women, are female, and they are often come in groups and with friends, and they always tell us of the immense benefit of socializing and of feeling the wellness and the detox benefit of swimming in cold water, and really, really enjoy it. However, I have to finish on a down note, but a down note that's not stopping the project. And is something I've been talking to a lot of heritage agencies and groups about just recently. And this is climate change for real. When we started the project, we knew the site flooded. It was right next to a river. It used to be fed by the river. We know it flooded. And we were told that the site was down on estimates in 2015 that it would flood on an average once every 100 years. Okay, we can deal with that, we decided. And we also designed the ground floor of the changing rooms in the cottage to flood. All the electrics are in the ceiling. They come halfway down the rooms. They're not in the floors. And the floors are breathing natural stone floors. And we thought, yes, we can cope with a flood, just as they coped in the years gone by. In 2018, when we're doing detailed designs, we were told that actually, we're getting a lot more water these days, milder, wetter winters. We should really anticipate that to be once in every 30 years. And again, total respect was designed, and the contractors were given a benchmark throughout the whole buildings, which was about level with the windowsill of the windows of the cottage on the ground floor, that was where the water was expected to come every 30 years. However, the site flooded the following year. And during construction, thank goodness it didn't flood. But last year, 2023, in January, it flooded again. And we thought, hello, that's twice in 4 years. And this winter, it flooded twice. And the second flood was more serious than anybody anticipated, because you'll possibly remember that we were so wet, the grounds were saturated, the rain ran off far quicker than it's meant to. It got into the river within 6 hours. The river rose quicker than it usually rises. It did, though, also drop quicker than it normally did. But it was a different type of flooding. And the second flood got into parts of the buildings it should not have got into, because we had designed particularly the plant room with flood-proof doors. And that created a lot of damage. And because of the damage, the plant room needs to be rewired. And we are currently, as a small charitable trust with no more money, taking legal and expert construction advice, because we do believe that somebody has to be held responsible for the plant room flooding and serious damage, which is going to cost quite a lot of money to put right before that can be put right. And so climate change, and I think this is all down to climate change, that even just 9 years ago we were being told was a 1 in 100 year event, is potentially from now on an annual event. And we're not the only heritage site in the UK that has issues with floodwater. There are many, many, and many others that are facing other issues to do with climate change. So this is quite a sobering story and quite an issue for us all as we go forward in the future. So 2 more slides. This is me in my wellies and the first flood in January this year. I'm going to see if the video will work. It's only about a minute. This is looking at the River Avon, and I'm obviously stood on land by the swimming pool. And just look how fast that river's flowing. Those are benches by the pontoon on the river bank. Clearly, this is where people sit over, and outdoor changing boxes by the swimming pool. The water's still flowing in, you can see. Those mats floating are the pool covers. They're thermal blankets to keep any heat in. And you can see the changing rooms and the cottage. And the water is nearly up to the windowsill level in the cottages, as it was designed to do. And this just quickly goes back to the river. It's full of mud as well. You can imagine when the water disappears every time, you're covered in silt and sand and mud. It doesn't get into the treatment equipment because we have systems of closing that down. But that's pretty scary, because that river is up about 3.5 meters, and that happened overnight. The last slide, I think, possibly contains a little bit more nudity. So look away now. Oh, no, there you are. This is also a very poor slide. This is me in an Edwardian swimming costume at one of our fundraising events with the local fashion department from one of our local universities, where we did a beauty contest, a catwalk of men and women, students who'd researched historic swimming costumes, had found lots of them on eBay, and had designed modern costumes as well. We had a fundraising event and had a lot of fun and made a lot of money. And at the end, I was hijacked by these 2 young ladies who are not actually naked. They're wearing bodysuits, but it was all part of the fun and games of a fundraising event. But it took me completely by surprise. And as I've said there, a chairperson's work is never done. And we're not going to let floods stop this project coming back into use as soon as is possible. But because of the litigious nature of our contract law in this country, we are going to have to prove whose fault it was, and we are going to have to seek recompense to rewire the plant room before we can get the circulation of the pool water working again. And there's other consequential damages which I haven't time to go into, but I've just about taken up 45 minutes of your time. This has been the most complicated project you could ever imagine. We handed over a beautiful finished project last September to our pool operator under a sublease. It was working perfectly. It looked beautiful. Everybody loved it. And we got not only national awards, we got a European Europa Nostra Award. And as I always explain to people, Europa Nostra and the Council of Europe, of which the UK is still a member, covers 47 countries. And we were one of the 9 winning awards last year on a European basis for what we've achieved at Cleveland Pools. So watch this space. I hope the pools will be back in working order and in use as soon as possible. But if we have to go to court, it will take longer. It might not happen till next year, which is a real sadness for me and all the other trustees. But the pools will get reopened again. We might have to do some extra works to the riverbank because of what's happened, because of a result of climate change and changing patterns in how the floods happen. And we're having to talk to the Environment Agency and lots of other people about that in the meantime. But I hope that's given you a snapshot of the whole project. I'll let Ollie take back the screen now because you've seen enough of naked people. And I'm very happy in the time we've got left to take any further questions. So thank you all very much, and it's back to you, Ollie.
Excellent, cool. Thank you for that. That was an excellent presentation. I mean, like you say, it really showed the complications and the challenges that you guys went through, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone. We wish you luck with the next step as you try and sort of reinstate the pools. So we are now on to the sort of Q&A section of this seminar. So if people do have questions that they want to ask, then either do add them to the chat or raise your hand, come on camera, and we can have questions for Paul addressed in that way. I can't see anything coming through at the moment, so I will take the advantage of being the chair and ask the first question myself, which was, I was really struck, I guess, Paul, by the volume of volunteers that you had for, you know, what is, I guess, quite a complex project, 113 and won awards for that. So I was just wondering what you did, I guess, to one, recruit and then keep volunteers enthused for the sort of 10 years in which you were delivered this project. Any advice that you could give to other organisations?
Yes, I mean, it was a slow burn at first, but it built up a head of steam. What was terrific was being able to attract the interest of people who had swam there when they were kids, even though now they were in their 50s and 60s, some of them. I mean, we had great stories like a young teenage girl telling, well, she was a young teenage girl at the time, telling us that she had her first kiss on the riverbank by the pools, and the person who kissed her was now her husband, and they had 8 grandchildren, and they told them stories about the Cleveland pools. And we recorded all this, and we got them to say, well, did you remember anybody else? Yeah, my next door neighbor used to come down with us. And the snowball effect of word of mouth was terrific. And then when people were asked to come to events, so we held events when which we just used, really, it's just communication, telling people what we were doing and why we were doing it, and asking them to come to events, and then saying, well, if you have any memories of the swimming pool, you know, afterwards go and have a cup of tea, and in the corner there's somebody with a tape recorder, and we got a grant from somebody else to buy ourselves little recorders. BBC Radio Bristol helped, you know, to drum up local people. Oh, go along to the pools on Saturday, they're having an open day, and tell them what you remember. And we've got thousands of stories as a result, and that word of mouth grew like a snowball. And then at the time, we were looking after the site whilst we were raising the money, and people volunteered to come down and do gardening, to keep it tidy, to keep it clean. People came and did ecological surveys. We had to move 60 slow worms off the site. We didn't have rare newts, but we had thousands of tadpoles and frogs. We had to move rare pondweed and relocate it into other sites nearby from the swimming pool before we could drain it and clean it and use it. And at every step we got people wanting to be involved, because it just caught people's imagination. And the fact that it had been completely hidden but for over 25 years behind these trees and all this overgrowth I keep complaining about, people didn't know it was there, or people have forgotten. And as soon as you then start, it's still there. Oh my goodness, it's still there. What? The pool I learned to swim in is still there. We thought it had been, you know, lost forever. And people wanted to help in whatever way they can, fundraising, promotion, making tea at public events and open days. And it just grew from there. And what you have to then be, and I'm sure I'm telling a lot of other people here how to suck eggs, but you have to keep your volunteers engaged. And you do have to have websites, you do have to have email newsletters. You have to let them know what you're doing. And even if you've got failure, even if you've got setbacks, you've got to tell them you've got it, why you've got it. And the more you can keep people informed, in our experience, the more they stay with you. That's been terrific. We've been amazed. We had a target of £100,000 of equivalent value of volunteering to prove to the lottery by the end of the project, and we hit that within the first year. And that was costly, because those of you who deal with the lottery will also know that they cost value in the value of volunteering input. So it's a valuable net contribution to your project targets. And they were quite amazed that we did it in the first of 5 years. We reached our volunteering targets. And it's all about communication and PR.
Excellent. No, yeah, that, yeah, definitely comms, and it sounds like some very lovely varied activities that you gave people the opportunity to do as well. I can see that Peter has raised his hand, so I'll come to you first, Peter, if you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Rather more pushing for a bit more detail about potential measures to reduce the flood risk in the future. So the first question is, what agency or body is has the ownership or responsibilities for the River Avon itself? Is there any other wider flood prevention scheme because presumably many other areas of Bath were also flooded. You weren't the only bit presumably that was flooded, which you can sort of piggyback on to get preventative work to reduce the flood risk for the future.
Peter, thank you for that. That's a very interesting question, and I could spend a long time discussing it because it's very, very complex. But basically, on our river, the authority with total domination of control over it, and there's no appeal procedures, and it's very hard to debate things and discuss with them, is the Environment Agency. And the Environment Agency control the river levels in the river, and they control the sluice gates through the city of Bath, which control the level of flood waters, and they release those waters when it suits them down to Bristol, where of course it becomes tidal. And so very often high water is held back upriver where we are, and we take more flood water than one would normally expect to take to protect a lot of lower level built housing lower downstream towards Bristol. And there is a place called Saltford and a place called Keynsham when they built a lot of housing very near to the river in recent years. You know all about this.
Yeah.
And so they are protected by keeping the water higher upstream where we are. And one feels that's not fair, but there's not a lot you can do about it. There's no appeal procedure, and the Environment Agency are charged with managing this to the best of their ability. But it's very hard to have a dialogue with them. There's a small part of the riverbank that was removed from our site many years ago, and it's only through a 20-meter gap in the riverbank that most of the water comes. We don't mind the water coming in to the windowsill in the cottage.
Right.
We treat for that, and we can deal with that. It's easy. But when there's more than that, and it comes quickly, we can't do anything about it. And the only way we can be allowed to rebuild that 20-meter length of riverbank is if further upstream we dig a big pit, a pond, and that takes the equivalent of 150% of the water that we currently take on our site. That would cost at least £250,000, and that doesn't take into anything about buying the land. Or there is an opportunity with the National Trust higher up land that they're looking at potentially making a wetlands, but it would be very expensive, and we'd need the Environment Agency's permission. It would take years. We'd have to raise a lot of money, and I'm not sure. With the current legislation is moving all the time because of climate change as well, as we learn about the impacts. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if that was the best solution as we go forwards. But we are looking at all these options, but it's difficult, it's time consuming, and it's going to be whatever we can do in the future to mitigate the flooding levels. It's going to be very expensive. And we haven't. So
you're saying that the National Trust wetlands is better than the big pit option?
Well, they could potentially allow us to fund a catchment area on their land. Let's just say that, and that would also fit in with their plans for developing part of it as a wetland in any case. But this is at a very early stage of discussion, and one where I think we could work together to hopefully mitigate the amount of water we have to take on our site. But I will just add, the water that caused the damage this year was much higher than people expected, was much quicker in terms of its inundation, and frankly caught the Environment Agency by surprise. And these are the issues we're all going to have to learn to live with as we go forward.
So cool. I'm just conscious of time, but I can see that both Ruth and Neil have come on camera, so I didn't know whether you have questions. So if you do, we can address those questions. So if you do just come off mic, and I'm sure Paul will be happy to sort of gather those as the final questions.
No, I don't have a specific question. I just thought it would be a bit friendlier if I put my camera on, but it's nice to see Paul again and to hear the more about the recent history and what's been happening at the Cleveland Pools. And I'm very sad that it's, you know, you're having all of these difficulties at the moment with the effects of the flooding. And I hope, you know, wish you luck with that.
Well, thank you, Ruth. Ruth is one of the councillors at Bath and North East Somerset, and was worked with me and others very closely over the last few years on the Great Spa Town UNESCO nomination. We can't. I said a little bit about that at the beginning. There's no time to really describe that, but that was a remarkable project that the council supported for over 10 years. And we've all learned a huge amount about the city of Bath and its relationship with water as a result. But I would also say as well, many of the people on the call might well be trustees of other projects, and I'm very worried as we go forward that these issues, frankly, are way beyond a small local trust like the Cleveland Pools Trust to deal with. Yet when this happened in January, you can imagine, I mean, to say we were suicidal and lost many nights' sleep and were very depressed is an understatement. But we're still here and we're still responsible for the project, and the lottery and the council are trying to do their best to support us. But they've limited resources too, and we've no money left. We've spent it all on restoring the pools. And I think as we go forward, these massive issues we have to deal with, like climate change, which are going to affect all heritage sites in one way or another, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's photovoltaics, whether it's flooding, whatever it is, we are all going to have issues. And I do worry about the so far very successful model in the UK of charitable trusts as we go forward, being a model under strain, shall I just say that, under a lot of pressure. And if it wasn't for the lottery, we'd all be out of business. And I wonder how sustainable that model is as we go forward, with cultural heritage being such an important part of our national fabric in all 4 home nations. And yet it's under severe pressure at the moment in terms of funding, and we all know that. So I do. It's just a point I'd like to mention about the role of charitable trusts, which the heritage sector has always relied on, as well as our national heritage agencies and the wonderful work the National Trust does, etc. Is a model right now under stress.
Thank you. Peter, I can see you've got your hand up. I'm just conscious of time, but if we,
it's a very simple one. Do you still have local opponents, or now that once the job was done and dusted, have they evaporated, so to speak? I get the impression that you've got good relations with the council. It's encouraging that you've got one councillor, and I know we've got another former councillor with us. Neil is a friend of mine, who is in fact a former chairman of your council. So aware you've got strong support there. But I just thought I'd ask the devil's advocate question.
Yes, and no, the council have been incredibly supportive, but of course, it was their property, and they weren't going to pay for the restoration of it. So the only people who could take it forward were ourselves. But they have been very helpful at times, and a couple of times during the project we've had crises, and there was one issue. There's one point where we needed, frankly, bailing out. But that's because the Environment Agency changed the river legislation overnight, and we'd already signed a contract, and then we had to renegotiate that contract for piling in the river, and it cost us an extra £400,000, which we just weren't calculating for. So that was quite an issue that hit us, between the eyes, and we had no option other than to go out and raise the additional funds. So. And could I just say, before I say bye-bye, that I know Peter, I recognise Peter from other Zoom calls we have with the historic Pools of Britain. So anybody interested in swimming, and particularly historic swimming pools, please look on the website, Historic Pools of Britain. Cleveland Pools is a member. We've been a founding member of it, and they are looking after historic pools all over the UK. They are bringing forward lots of restoration projects, lots of local authorities under pressure to divest themselves of historic swimming pools and letting them out to charitable trusts and other people. It's a great national group of mutual support, helping to bring back swimming, not just in modern facilities, but in some of the wonderful historic pools, Turkish baths, and other great facilities we have around the country. So if you're interested, please have a look at the Historic Pools of Britain. Thanks, Oliver. That's been my final shot.
No, definitely we'll be visiting after this. So excellent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a really interesting seminar. I will do a little plug, as I say, this is a part of a series of seminars. So we do have another one booked and planned for July, which I'll just pop the link in the chat there. Oh no, that's the wrong one. That was Cleveland Pools. I'm trying to be clever and have failed at that, but hopefully this is the right one. The link to the next one, which is the mini-airy project, which is the art and science of manuscript heritage, which was another Europa Nostra Award winner in the UK. I think it was the University of Cambridge who lead that project. So if people are interested in that as well, do sign up and come along. And then we're starting the plan for the next years ahead as well, which will again focus on Europa Nostra Award winners, both in the UK and further afield. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, we may be able to stop recording now and then